Dennis Rader, BTK serial killer. Here's a picture of Dennis Rader and his wife and their 2 children. Rader seemed to have had a normal life. He worked in the church. He was a devoted husband. He had finished school. He had worked within the justice system. And, the neighbors and his friends that had talked of Rader would have never imagined that he would become the monster that he was, or that he would commit the crimes that he had committed. The first victims of Dennis Rader was the Otero family. He murdered the mother, the father, and the 2 younger children. It was a school morning. The older 3 Otero children had already left for school, and one of the younger siblings had let their family dog out and left the back door unlocked, and that's how Rader got into their home. He held him at gunpoint. He was surprised that Otero Sr. was there. He thought it was just going to be the mother and the 2 younger children. And he held them at gunpoint, like I said. He had bound their hands and their feet. And, he took Otero Sr. and he placed a plastic bag over his head and secured it with some cords around his neck. He moved on to the mother, Mrs. Otero, and he strangled her, and he thought she had died as a result of that. But then he noticed that Otero Sr. had actually moved, and when he did, he ripped a hole in the bag, and he was able to breathe. So Rader goes over to Otero Sr., and he puts a cloth of some sort, like maybe a towel or a shirt, over the bag that was on his head, placed another bag on top of it, and secured it with cords. And then, to Rader's surprise, Mrs. Otero, who's not dead, comes back, and she's freaking out. So he goes and he strangles her again. And this time, he uses a cord and he uses a rope, and he's able to subdue her. And she ultimately dies. That's how she passed away. Otero Jr., he's 9 years old. Rader takes him to another bedroom, and again, his hands and feet are bound, and he gives him the same treatment that he gave the dad. Puts a plastic bag over his head, and then a shirt, and then another bag, and then secures that with cords around his neck. And that's how Otero Jr. dies. Now, Josephine, who is the 11-year-old daughter, I think it's just horrific. He takes her to the basement, and her hands and feet are bound, and he hangs her from the sewer pipe, and he pulls her panties down, and he masturbates while she chokes to death. And that's how she dies. His 5th victim is Catherine Bright. Rader was driving around one day, and he spots Catherine Bright. He decides right then and there, that's going to be his next victim. So he stalks her for a while, and then when he's ready, he breaks into her home and waits for her. However, whenever Catherine Bright comes home, she's not alone. Her brother, Kevin Bright, is with her. So when the Brights walk into their home, they are greeted by Rader, who is sitting there with a gun. He holds them at gunpoint, and Rader has Kevin tie Catherine up. And then in return, he ties Kevin up, and he ties Kevin's feet to a bedpost. And he thinks, he's tied up, he's secured. He goes in here to where Catherine's at another bedroom, and he begins to strangle her. Well, he hears some ruckus going around, and he goes and he checks on Kevin. Well, Kevin has managed to get his hands free, and he is fighting. He's fighting with Rader, and Rader has a gun, so Rader pulls it out and he shoots him in the head. And he sees the blood, and he thinks, okay, he's done. He goes back to Catherine. Well, Catherine's got her hands undone, and she's fighting for her life. So he begins to strangle her again. And when he realizes that this isn't going to work, he pulls out a knife and he stabs Catherine Bright multiple times in her abdomen and in her torso. And that ultimately she passes out. She doesn't die just yet. She actually dies at the hospital. Even though, ambulances arrived, EMTs arrived, they tried to save her and they just couldn't. However, Kevin Bright is not his 6th victim, because even though they fought, he was able to get away. Rader goes to check on Kevin because Catherine's subdued, and he goes to the bedroom, and Kevin's not there. Then he hears the front door open, and Rader goes downstairs to see what's going on, and he looks out the door, and Kevin's running down the road, and he figures, man, I left a witness alive. He's gonna be able to identify me. So he doesn't wait. Rader gets in his car and he leaves. He cleans up his mess as much as he can, and then he leaves. And even though there's a witness, Kevin gave a description of Rader, gave a sketch artist, details. They still couldn't connect Rader as the BTK serial killer. All right, Shirley Vian is Rader's sixth victim. Rader was out once again, just driving around trying to find his next victim, and he sees this little boy who's walking home. So Rader waits, and he stalks him. He sees which house he goes into. And once he goes into his home, Rader goes to the little boy's home and knocks on the door. The little boy answers the door, and Rader tells him, I'm a private detective. He shows him a picture of his actual own family and asks the boy if he can identify them. And Rader has a gun, so he pushes his way into the house. And whenever he enters the home, Shirley Vian comes out of her bedroom. And she's sick that day. She's wearing her robe still, and she sees Rader there with a gun. Well, Rader thinks that he's just going to tie these kids up. But he quickly realizes that's not going to work because they're kids. There's three of them. There's kids, and they're screaming and they're crying. So he asks Shirley Vian to help him move the children to the bathroom. He gives them a blanket. He gives them toys. Tries to calm them down. He then closes the door, ties the door shut where the kids can't get out, and has Shirley help him push the bed up against the door so that if they beat and bang and they try to get out the door, they won't be able to. And he tells Shirley, he says, I have this sexual fantasy, and I need to tie you up, and I need to have my way with you. And Shirley, she actually throws up because she's sick. And, Rader gives her some water, tries to calm her down, but then he ties her up. And after he ties her up, her kids are beating and banging on the bathroom door, screaming, while he's killing their mother. He puts a plastic bag over her head, and he takes the belt of her robe and secures it around her neck, and ultimately strangles her to death. And then kids are beating and banging on the door saying, hey, mom's sick. The neighbors are going to come check on us. Because Rader was going to kill the children too. But then the telephone rings, and that spooks him. So Rader quickly cleans up his mess because Miss Vian is already gone, and he gets the heck out of there. Rader's next victim, number 7, is Nancy Fox. The first time Rader saw Nancy, he knew that she was going to be his next victim. He stalks her. He checks her mail and finds out her name. Finds out where she works. She works at a jewelry store. And he goes in and out of the jewelry store a couple times just to kind of see her, to size her up, and to learn her routine. And then when he's ready, he decided that night was going to be the night he was going to kill Nancy. Rader cuts her phone line and breaks into her home and waits for her to get home. So when Nancy walks into her home, she finds Rader in the kitchen waiting on her with a gun. He holds her at gunpoint and he tells her, I have a sexual problem and that I need to tie you up and I need to have sex with you. And although Nancy was upset, she thought Rader was just going to rape her, and then she was. So at that point, Nancy tells him, okay, let's get this done over with so I can call the cops. She thinks that, he's going to rape her and then he's going to leave and then she's going to be free. So she tells Rader, I need to use the bathroom. He tells her, go ahead. He tells her when she comes out, he wants her naked. So she comes out the bathroom door, and she's naked, and he handcuffs her. He has her lay on the bed on her stomach. And he bounds her feet. He then takes a belt and wraps it around her neck and strangles her to death. And then he replaces the belt with pantyhose. And then he masturbates over her. And then he takes him some souvenirs and gets in his car and leaves. Rader's 8th victim, Maureen Hedge. Marine Hedge actually lived in the same neighborhood as Rader for over 30 years. They knew each other. One night, um, Rader waited for Marine to come home from bingo, and he was going to kill her. But to his surprise, she didn't come home alone. She came home with one of her friends from bingo that stayed there until 1 o'clock in the morning. And since she had came home early, Rader hid in the bedroom closet, and he waited. And when the friend left and Marine went to bed, the next morning he turns on that bathroom light to get a better look at Marine, and that wakes her up. And she screams. And as soon as she starts screaming, Rader jumps onto her and starts choking her. And this time, Rader strangles her with his own hands. And then once he kills her by with his bare hands, he takes her and puts her in the trunk of her car, drives her to a church, places her naked body on the altar, and takes pictures. And then he takes her, puts her back in the trunk, takes her body, and dumps it in a ditch where people would dispose of dead dogs. And her body is found 7 miles from her home with a pair of pantyhose around her neck. And that's how Marine Hedge dies. Rader's 9th victim, Vicky. I'm not going to be able to pronounce her last name right. I'm sorry. She was always a potential victim of Rader. And when Rader was ready, he was going to make her his 9th victim. He dressed as a telephone repairman, and he actually knocked on Vicky's door and asked if he could check her phone line. And she let him in, and she watched as he pretended to check out, her phone line. But when her back was turned, that's when he pulls out his gun. With Rader's gun in Vicky's face, he asks Vicky if she'll go to the bedroom. And she's upset, but she agrees. And once they're in the bedroom, Rader ties up her hands, and her feet, but she's able to get her hands free. And that's when she physically begins to fight with Rader. She's trying to fight him off, but he grabs a nylon sock and starts strangling her. Rader believed that she was dead, but she was not. She started fighting for her life again, but Rader was able to strangle her again. And once she was down and not moving, he rearranged her clothes and took some pictures. Vicky had mentioned earlier that her husband was going to be home any minute. And Rader was nervous because the dogs were barking and the windows were open. And he thought that with all this commotion, somebody's going to hear her screaming, hear their fights, hear the dogs. So he cleans up his mess as much as he can, and then he leaves. Rader's 10th and final victim, Dolores Davis. Rader had cased Dolores Davis's home, but he couldn't find a way to get in. And she's home. So it's not a sneak attack. He's not waiting for her in her home when she gets home. She's already there. But he can't figure out how to get in there. And he's so desperate for his next fix, for his next victim. He throws a cinder block through her plate glass window, which, of course, she hears the commotion. She comes out of the bedroom. And when she does, she is greeted by Rader with a gun, and he handcuffs her. He tells her, I'm a fugitive. I'm on the run. I need food. I need a car. I need to get out of here. And so he talks to Dolores for a while, making her think, hey, I just need some stuff to get me to, where I'm going. And so she's handcuffed, and he's going all around her home, and he's getting stuff of value that he can maybe sell or something that's going to give him some money. Takes the keys to her car and acts like he's going to leave. And whenever she thinks that he's going to leave, but he doesn't. When she thinks he's going to leave, he actually removes her handcuffs and ties her hands and her feet. And he grabs a pair of pantyhose and he strangles her to death. And afterwards, he places her body on a blanket and places her in the trunk of her own car. And then takes her to a bridge and puts her under a bridge with a mask on her face and leaves her there. This is how Rader got caught. It's no secret that Rader has always played cat and mouse with the police. He would send messages, notes, poems, even a floppy disk to television stations, the newspaper. He wanted this out there. He wanted people to know. BTK, bind, tied and killed. He wanted his name out there. Well, he wanted the BTK out there. But the problem is, and he even, you know what? He even telephoned the police and let them know from a payphone that he had killed Nancy Fox. He left DNA at multiple crime scenes because of semen. And he got, Rader got reckless. He sent a floppy disk to the police from his computer at church. Well, that tied that floppy disk to that computer to that church that connected Rader to the crimes. And the police were able to obtain a DNA sample from Rader's daughter. And as soon as Rader's daughter thought her dad could be the BTK serial killer, she was willing to give a DNA sample. And when it came back that his DNA had matched the DNA of the crime scenes, that's when they had him. Rader was charged with 10 counts of murder. And when the judge asked Rader to give details about these killings, he had no problem to tell it all. Tell each detail of what he did to each victim. And ultimately, and even though Kansas did not have the death penalty at the time the killings were committed, Judge Gregory Waller delivered the longest sentence he could, which is a minimum of 175 years without a chance of parole. Rader will spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, which is where he belongs. 10 consecutive life terms.